The collision model really summarizes what this is all about. Molecules have to collide in order to react. That explains why solids don't react very well. Their movements are minimized. Liquids are going to react a lot better, and gases even more so. We've talked about group 1 elements. They want to lose their electrons, we say. Consider lithium. It has an electron it wants to lose. But it's still going to take energy to remove that electron. It doesn't just drop it on its own. Something has to collide with it. So it's stable enough to hold that electron, but it doesn't take much energy. It doesn't take much of a collision to lose that electron. Now, collisions happen all the time. Right now, we're being bombarded by oxygen, and oxygen's pretty reactive. But thankfully, those collisions don't have enough energy to make a chemical reaction happen. Fire is just oxygen reacting with some kind of carbon. And so if it happened all of the time, well, the world would burn. So it has to have a certain amount of energy. This energy, there's a threshold to it, and we call it the activation energy. So while oxygen can bombard the plant molecules all day long, no fire is started because it hasn't met that activation energy. Activation energy tells you everything you need to know about what's going on. It's the energy to activate the reaction. Iron sitting around all of the time, iron with oxygen is rust. It doesn't rust instantly. It has to have a certain amount of energy. Also, the orientation is important, especially with a molecule like a polar molecule. Imagine a polar molecule has a positive side and a negative side. Well, those have to align, plus to minus. And understanding that molecules are moving very fast, and one side is going to repel the other side, one side will attract the other side, they have to be correctly oriented. So you can imagine most of the collisions are not going to have that correct orientation. Now, these factors that affect the rate, how fast they happen, should be kind of intuitive just from everyday life. If I increase the temperature, and temperature is related to energy, increasing the energy is going to increase the rate of reaction. The particles are going to move faster, so they're going to collide more frequently. When they have collisions, they're going to do so with more energy. If I increase the surface area, well, then I'm allowing for an increase in the rate of reaction because I'm allowing for more interactions. Concentration, we've seen a little bit already. Most of the time, concentration increases the rate of reaction. Sometimes it doesn't affect it. Sometimes, in rare instances, it actually reverses it, which is kind of hard to imagine, but it happens. And then catalysts. Hopefully you've learned all about catalysts in biology because they're very important in biological processes. So catalysts lower the activation energy. They make it easier for things to happen. And catalysts are everywhere, especially inside of us. This is my favorite PhET simulation. You can try this one at home. You see the website up here. And this is a nice picture for activation energy. So let's add a couple of molecules into chamber A, a couple of reactants. And so they're moving around. Let's do a few. They're moving around. You see they're colliding, and they're always changing speeds. And the speed is related to the temperature. So you see the temperature fluctuating. This is a nice illustration of temperature is average kinetic energy. Some particles are going to be moving faster, some are going to be moving slower. They collide with each other, and so it's not a steady thing. It's always going to fluctuate. Now in the middle, we see a ruler. We see a barrier. This is the activation energy. And you can tell from this, the activation energy, well, I guess it's all a relative thing, but you see the particles are not moving over. I suppose if we watched it at this setting for a while, eventually one of them would go over. Hey, there it goes. Thanks, molecule. Now, we see the product. This is something we'll get into later. The product has lower energy than the reactants. Ooh, it almost came back. This is releasing energy because it starts at 15 and it ends at, looks like, about 8. So this product has less energy than it started with. And so this is a reaction that, well, you would feel heat. This is what we call an exothermic reaction. Hey, it came back. We can lower the activation energy. How would we lower the activation energy? By adding a catalyst. So a catalyst changes the pathway. So again, we have a lot of biological functions that depend on a catalyst, where a normal reaction might be here. This is not likely to happen under normal conditions. And if we waited for it to happen, life wouldn't exist as we know it. So over time, catalysts have evolved, and they, again, have lowered the activation energy so that these reactions happen more frequently and easier. So reactions that happen that are favorable, things that happen naturally, have a relatively low activation energy. Reactions that don't tend to happen, that require some kind of outside input, well, those have a high activation energy. Increasing concentration makes the reaction happen faster because you're going to have more collisions. More collisions, more reactions. Increasing the temperature, well, that's going to give them more energy. More energy, more collisions, it's going to happen faster. This is just a vocabulary. And so when we have reactions, we want to identify them as unimolecular, bimolecular, or termolecular. Bimolecular means two reactants are going to collide before we have a reaction. Termolecular means three atoms or three particles have to collide simultaneously for a reaction to happen. This, of course, is very common. Most reactions are like this. This is fairly rare, but it happens enough that we're going to mention it. So again, it's not that A and B collide and then C collides. It requires all three to collide at once. A unimolecular only has one thing. So this is indicative of like radioactive decay. It doesn't have to collide. It's just one thing breaking down on its own. Now bimolecular, it could be two of the same thing. So it could be written as this. So these are both bimolecular. And they'll give you a product as well, but the product, not important to identify which type of thing it is. So Beer's law is something that's very useful to determining concentration. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas page, it's not under the kinetics page. It's under the concentration page. So on your formulas p The nice thing is it's a really simple equation. And on your formulas page, it's actually written like this. So if there was ever an equation you don't need to memorize, it's this one, because A equals ABC. That's pretty simple. Now, different sources use different variables, but they all mean the same thing. So how does Beer's law work? Well, if we have some kind of concentration that is colored, the more concentrated it is, the darker color it's going to show. So what we do is we take a light source and we shine it through, and we find the difference between the light that goes in and the light that comes out. So in the lab, we'll do this lab next semester, we have a cuvette. And a cuvette is just this plastic prism. And so we put the liquid in there, we pick a specific light source, and we shine it through. And we have a device that measures the incoming versus the outgoing. Now, in order to solve this equation, well, there's three things that you need to know. One is the path length. So here, B is the path length. How far does it go through here? Now, you'll be given that because they wouldn't expect you to measure it with a ruler. So the path length will affect our measurements. Then you also have the concentration. And so that's your molarity. Now, this guy right here is a constant. And that's going to be specific to whatever substance it is you're working with. And so epsilon here, or A in this case, is a constant. It's the molar absorptivity constant. Again, that'll be given to you because it's different for every substance. So we can multiply those three things together, and that tells us what we get out of it. And again, ultimately, this is just showing you how to measure concentration. So if you're given one of these problems, they're going to give you three of the variables and just ask you to solve